The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small-town police station as Officer Mike Rodriguez leaned back in his creaky desk chair, nursing his third cup of coffee that morning. At 38, he had seen enough in his 15 years on the force to believe he could spot a liar from across the room. The morning had been quiet until the front desk sergeant knocked on his doorframe. "Rodriguez, got a kid out here, says he needs to report something important. Looks like another runaway situation to me," Sergeant Peterson said with a tired sigh. Mike groaned internally. Teenage drama was not his favorite part of the job, especially on a Monday morning when he had paperwork piling up from the weekend's arrests. He grabbed his notepad and walked to the front lobby, where he found a 17-year-old boy sitting nervously on the hard plastic chairs that lined the waiting area. The teenager was tall and lanky, with messy brown hair that looked like he had been running his hands through it. His clothes were clean but wrinkled, and his sneakers were scuffed from obvious wear. What struck Mike immediately was the boy's posture. He sat perfectly straight, hands placed precisely on his knees, staring directly ahead with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone his age. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. What can I help you with today?" Mike asked, settling into the chair across from the boy. "My name is Danny Martinez, sir. I need to report that my father is missing," the teenager said, his voice steady despite the obvious stress in his eyes. Mike pulled out his notepad, already mentally categorizing this as another domestic dispute. In his experience, missing fathers usually meant they had walked out after an argument or were sleeping off a drinking binge at a friend's house. "When did you last see your father, Danny?" 3 days ago, sir. He left for work at the naval base and never came home." Naval base? Mike's interest perked up slightly. The town was about 50 miles from the nearest naval installation, and most of the families connected to the military lived closer to the base itself. "Yes, sir. My father is Commander James Martinez. He works in special operations." Mike tried to suppress a smile. The kid was clearly trying to make his missing father sound more important than he probably was. In his experience, most military families exaggerated their relatives' rank or importance when dealing with civilian authorities. "Special operations, huh? What exactly does your father do there, Danny?" "I'm not allowed to discuss the details of his work, sir. That information is classified, but I can tell you that he has never missed coming home without calling. Something has happened to him." The boy's formal way of speaking was starting to irritate Mike. He had dealt with plenty of military kids over the years, and they often put on this act of being more mature and disciplined than their civilian peers. It usually fell apart quickly once you pressed them for real details. "Look, son, I'm sure your dad is fine. Military guys sometimes have to work extended shifts or get called away on short notice. Has your mother tried calling his unit?" Danny's composure cracked slightly. "My mother passed away 2 years ago, sir. It's just me and my father now. And he would never leave me without making arrangements, or at least sending word through official channels." Mike felt a small pang of sympathy, but pushed it aside. He had heard sob stories before, and letting emotions cloud his judgment never helped anyone. "I'm sorry for your loss, Danny. But you're 17, right? You can take care of yourself for a few days. Your dad probably just got caught up in some military exercise or training. These things happen." "Sir, with respect, my father is a Navy SEAL. He's been in the teams for 22 years. He doesn't just disappear during routine training exercises." Now Mike almost laughed out loud. A Navy SEAL? This kid was really laying it on thick. In his 15 years of police work, he had met maybe 2 actual Navy SEALs, and they certainly didn't live in small towns 50 miles from the nearest base. They were usually stationed at major naval facilities or deployed overseas. "A SEAL, huh? That's pretty impressive, Danny. I'm sure he'll turn up soon. Maybe he's on some secret mission he couldn't tell you about." The sarcasm in Mike's voice was barely concealed. He was already thinking about how to wrap up this conversation and get back to his real work. The kid seemed harmless enough, just worried about his father and maybe letting his imagination run wild. Danny's jaw tightened, but he maintained his military straight posture. "Officer Rodriguez, I understand this might sound unusual, but I'm telling you the truth. My father's commanding officer would have contacted me if this was a planned operation. Something is wrong. Tell you what, Danny, why don't you give me your father's full name and unit information, and I'll make some calls for you? That way you'll know we took this seriously." Mike was humoring the boy now, planning to make one perfunctory call to the naval base and then close the matter. He had better things to do than chase down a military father who had probably just lost track of time or forgotten to call home. "Commander James Eduardo Martinez, SEAL Team 3. His direct commanding officer is Captain Richardson, but I don't have a direct number for him." Mike scribbled the information in his notepad, already mentally composing the brief phone call he would make later. He would ask some desk clerk to confirm that Commander Martinez was accounted for, get told that personnel information was confidential, and then he could tell the kid that his father was fine and that military families needed to be patient with operational schedules. "All right, Danny, I've got the information. I'll make some inquiries and get back to you. In the meantime, you should go home and wait. I'm sure your father will be in touch soon." Danny stood up, his movements precise and controlled. "Thank you, Officer Rodriguez. I'll be at home waiting for your call. Here's my phone number." He handed Mike a piece of paper with his contact information written in neat, careful handwriting. As the teenager walked toward the exit, Mike shook his head slightly. Kids these days watched too many military movies and thought they knew how the real world worked. Still, there had been something about the boy's demeanor that nagged at him. The formal speech patterns, the perfect posture, the way he had maintained eye contact throughout their entire conversation. It was almost like talking to a young soldier rather than a typical teenager. Mike pushed the thought aside as he returned to his desk. He had real police work to do, and this missing father case would probably resolve itself by the end of the day. In his experience, these situations usually did. He tucked Danny's information into his desk drawer, planning to make the required phone call after lunch. It would be a quick conversation, and then he could focus on more pressing matters. After all, how complicated could it be to verify that one missing father was safe and accounted for? What Mike didn't know was that at that very moment, a classified search and rescue operation was being organized at the naval base. Commander James Martinez had indeed disappeared, but not in the way his son had described. The truth was far more complex and dangerous than either Mike or Danny could have imagined. 3 hours later, Mike was halfway through a sandwich when his desk phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and saw it was an outside line with a number he didn't recognize. "Rodriguez here," he answered around a bite of turkey and Swiss. "Officer Rodriguez, this is Petty Officer Williams from Naval Base Coronado. I'm calling regarding your inquiry about Commander James Martinez." Mike nearly choked on his sandwich. He hadn't even made the call yet. "I'm sorry, what inquiry? I haven't called anyone yet." "Sir, we received a notification that local law enforcement had been contacted regarding Commander Martinez's absence from his residence. This is now a matter of national security interest. I need to inform you that you are to take no further action on this case pending the arrival of federal authorities." Mike's stomach dropped. The casual dismissal he had planned was suddenly looking like a major mistake. "National security? Look, I just had a kid come in worried about his missing father. I was planning to make a routine inquiry call." "Sir, with respect, this is no longer a local matter. Commander Martinez is involved in classified operations, and his current status requires federal oversight. A team will be at your location within 2 hours to take over this investigation." The line went dead, leaving Mike staring at his phone in confusion. He quickly pulled Danny's information from his desk drawer and read through his notes again. The kid had been telling the truth about his father being a Navy SEAL. But why was the military suddenly treating this like a major security incident? Mike's mind raced as he tried to understand what he had stumbled into. In 15 years of police work, he had never had federal authorities take over a simple missing person case. The military's reaction suggested that Commander Martinez wasn't just missing. Something serious had happened to him. He picked up his phone and dialed Danny's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Mike left a brief message asking the teenager to call him back, then spent the next hour pacing his office and trying to piece together what little information he had. At exactly 2:30 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of the police station. Mike watched through his window as several men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, followed by a group of military personnel in dress uniforms. The sight made his palms sweat with nervous anticipation. Sergeant Peterson knocked on his door frame again, but this time his expression was serious. "Rodriguez, you've got some important visitors. They're asking for you specifically." Mike straightened his tie and walked to the front lobby, where he found himself face-to-face with 2 FBI agents, a Navy captain, and a man in civilian clothes who radiated the kind of quiet authority that made Mike instinctively straighten his shoulders. "Officer Rodriguez." "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. This is Agent Martinez, no relation to the missing person, and Captain Richardson from Naval Special Warfare Command. We need to discuss the report you received this morning." Mike nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Of course. Would you like to use one of our interview rooms?" "That would be appropriate," Agent Chen replied. As they settled around the small table in interview room 2, Captain Richardson leaned forward with an expression Mike couldn't quite read. "Officer Rodriguez, we understand that Danny Martinez came to you this morning reporting his father missing. We need to know exactly what he told you and what actions you've taken." Mike consulted his notes and relayed the conversation as accurately as he could remember. He noticed that the adults around the table exchanged glances when he mentioned Danny's formal speech patterns and military bearing. "Did the boy provide any other details about his father's work or recent activities?" Agent Chen asked. "No. He said the details were classified. He seemed to understand operational security better than most adults I deal with." Captain Richardson's expression softened slightly. "That would be accurate. Commander Martinez has raised his son to understand the requirements of military life. Danny has been briefed on basic security protocols since he was old enough to understand them." "So his father really is a Navy SEAL?" Mike asked, feeling foolish for his earlier skepticism. "Commander Martinez is one of our most experienced operators," Captain Richardson confirmed. "He's led missions in 6 different countries over the past 10 years. His disappearance is being treated as a potential hostile action against U.S. military personnel." The weight of that statement settled over Mike like a heavy blanket. A hostile action meant kidnapping, assassination, or worse. He thought about Danny sitting alone in his house, waiting for a phone call that might never come. Agent Chen opened a folder and placed several photographs on the table. Commander Martinez was last seen leaving his apartment at the naval base 3 mornings ago. Security cameras show him driving his personal vehicle off base at approximately 06:30 hours. The vehicle was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot 20 miles from here. Mike studied the photographs, which showed a man who looked remarkably similar to his son. The same straight posture, the same intense eyes, but with the weathered features of someone who had spent years in dangerous places. "Any signs of struggle at the vehicle?" Mike asked, his police training kicking in despite his nervousness about the federal presence. "None," Agent Martinez replied. "But there was evidence that he had been under surveillance for several weeks prior to his disappearance. We believe this was a professional operation." Captain Richardson leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Commander Martinez has made enemies during his career, men with the resources and motivation to organize complex kidnapping operations. We're treating this as a national security threat." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. "What about Danny? Is he safe?" "For now, yes. but we'll be placing him under protective custody pending the resolution of this situation. We can't risk anyone using him as leverage against his father." "He's just 17, Mike said, surprised by his own protective instincts toward the boy. "This morning I thought he was just another worried teenager making up stories. I almost didn't take his report seriously." Agent Chen's expression remained neutral, but Mike caught a hint of approval in her eyes. "Your initial skepticism was reasonable, Officer Rodriguez. Most missing person reports involving teenagers are exactly what they appear to be. But Danny Martinez has been trained since childhood to recognize when something is genuinely wrong. His father's absence triggered protocols that most children his age wouldn't understand." "What kind of protocols?" Mike asked. Captain Richardson answered. "Emergency contact procedures, backup communication methods, recognition of operational security breaches. Commander Martinez has been preparing his son for the possibility that something like this might happen." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Mike thought about his own children, safely at school and completely unaware that such dangers existed in the world. Danny Martinez had grown up knowing that his father's job put their entire family at risk. "Officer Rodriguez," Agent Chen said, closing the folder, "we appreciate your cooperation in this matter. We'll be taking over the investigation from here, but we may need to contact you if additional information comes to light." Mike nodded, understanding that he was being politely dismissed from a case that had grown far beyond his capabilities. "What should I tell Danny if he calls back? He left me his number and asked me to contact him with any information." "Tell him that his father's disappearance is being handled by the appropriate authorities, and that he'll be contacted soon by people who can help him," Captain Richardson said. Beyond that, this conversation never happened. As the federal team prepared to leave, Mike found himself thinking about the morning's events from a completely different perspective. Danny Martinez hadn't been a dramatic teenager seeking attention. He had been a young man who recognized a genuine threat to his father's life and had followed proper procedures by reporting it to local authorities. The boy's formal speech patterns and military bearing weren't an act. They were the result of growing up in a world where precision and protocol could mean the difference between life and death. His insistence that his father would never disappear without notification wasn't teenage drama. It was the educated assessment of someone who understood how special operations personnel operated. Mike walked back to his desk, feeling humbled and slightly ashamed of his initial reaction. He had let his preconceptions about teenagers and military families cloud his judgment, and it was only luck that had prevented his dismissive attitude from interfering with a genuine national security investigation. He spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about Danny Martinez, alone in his house and waiting for news about his father. The boy had done everything right, following procedures he had probably hoped he would never need to use. Now he was waiting for strangers to determine whether his father was alive or dead. As Mike drove home that evening, he made a mental note to treat every report with the seriousness it deserved, regardless of the age of the person making it. Sometimes the most unlikely stories turned out to be the most important ones to investigate. 2 days later, Mike was finishing up his incident report about the Martinez case when Sergeant Peterson appeared at his door with an expression Mike had never seen before. The usually calm veteran looked genuinely shaken. "Rodriguez, you need to come to the front desk immediately. We have a situation." Mike followed Peterson through the hallway, wondering what could have rattled the 20-year veteran so badly. As they approached the lobby, he heard voices. One he recognized as Danny Martinez, and another that carried the unmistakable authority of high-ranking military command. Standing near the front desk were Danny and a man who could only be described as intimidating in the most professional sense possible. The stranger was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a navy dress uniform with more ribbons and insignia than Mike had ever seen on one person. His hair was silver at the temples, his posture was ramrod straight, and his eyes held the kind of steady intensity that made civilians instinctively straighten their own shoulders. But what immediately captured Mike's attention was the interaction between the man and Danny, the teenager, who had been so formal and controlled during their previous meeting, was standing at attention with tears streaming down his face. The older man had placed both hands on Danny's shoulders and was speaking to him in low, urgent tones. "Officer Rodriguez," Danny called out when he spotted Mike approaching. "This is Captain Morrison, my father's commanding officer. He has news about my father." Captain Morrison turned toward Mike, and the full force of his attention felt like standing in front of a searchlight. Mike found himself automatically straightening his posture as the officer approached with an extended hand. "Officer Rodriguez, I'm Captain William Morrison, commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I understand you took Danny's initial report regarding his father's disappearance." Mike shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the direct eye contact that seemed to see right through him. "Yes, sir, though I have to admit, I didn't initially understand the seriousness of the situation." "Few people would have," Captain Morrison replied. "Commander Martinez's work requires a level of operational security that makes these situations complex for civilian authorities. But I understand Danny followed proper protocols in reporting to local law enforcement first." "Sir," Mike began, then paused as he noticed Danny's emotional state. The teenager was trying to maintain his composure, but he was clearly struggling with whatever news he had received. "Is Commander Martinez alive?" Captain Morrison said immediately, and Mike saw Danny's shoulders sag with relief. "But the situation was more serious than we initially believed. Commander Martinez was taken by a hostile group with connections to an operation he led in Afghanistan 2 years ago. They held him for 4 days before our recovery team located and extracted him." Mike felt his own relief wash over him. Despite having known Danny for less than a week, he had found himself genuinely worried about the boy's situation. "Is he injured?" "He's receiving medical attention at a secure facility. He'll make a full recovery, but it will take some time. Which brings me to why I'm here." Captain Morrison turned to include Danny in the conversation. Danny handled this situation exactly as he was trained to do. He recognized the threat, followed proper reporting procedures, and maintained operational security throughout the crisis. Mike looked between the captain and Danny, beginning to understand that this visit was about more than just providing an update on the investigation. "Officer Rodriguez," Captain Morrison continued, "I want to commend you for taking Danny's report seriously and facilitating the federal response. Your professionalism helped ensure that we could locate and recover Commander Martinez before the situation deteriorated further." Mike felt a flush of embarrassment. "Sir, to be honest, I initially didn't believe Danny's story. I thought he was exaggerating his father's importance. It wasn't until the FBI contacted me that I realized how serious this was." Captain Morrison's expression didn't change, but Mike caught something that might have been approval in his eyes. "That's an honest assessment, officer. Most people would have reacted the same way. The fact that you maintained proper procedure despite your skepticism demonstrates good police work." Danny spoke up, his voice still somewhat shaky, but regaining its usual formal tone. "Officer Rodriguez, I want to thank you for listening to me and taking action. I know my story sounded unusual." Mike looked at the 17-year-old who had walked into his station 3 days ago, seeing him now with completely different eyes. This wasn't just a worried teenager. This was a young man who had been raised to handle crisis situations that would overwhelm most adults. "Danny, I owe you an apology. You came to me with a legitimate emergency, and I almost dismissed it because I let my assumptions get in the way of proper procedure. You handled this situation better than many adults would have." Captain Morrison nodded approvingly. Danny has been raised in an environment where attention to detail and proper procedure can be matters of life and death. His father has prepared him well for the realities of military life. Mike turned to Captain Morrison with a question that had been bothering him since the federal agents had taken over the case. "Sir, can you tell me how this kind of thing happens? How does someone track down a Navy SEAL? Commander Martinez has spent 22 years in special operations, Captain Morrison explained. During that time, he's participated in dozens of classified missions that have disrupted enemy operations and eliminated threats to American interests. Unfortunately, some of those enemies have long memories and significant resources. They've been planning this for months, Danny added, his voice steadier now. Captain Morrison told me they had been watching our apartment, following my father's routines, looking for vulnerabilities in his security practices. Mike shook his head in amazement. I can't imagine living with that kind of constant threat. Most military families don't face this level of risk, Captain Morrison said. But those of us in special operations understand that our work sometimes follows us home. We train our families to recognize and respond to these threats because preparation saves lives. What happens now? Mike asked. Captain Morrison glanced at Danny before answering. Commander Martinez will be relocated to a new assignment once he's recovered. Danny will be finishing his senior year at a different high school under a different name. They'll be starting over with new identities and enhanced security protocols. The weight of that statement settled over Mike like a heavy blanket. Danny would be leaving behind everything familiar, his school, his friends, his entire life, because his father's service to his country had made their current location too dangerous to maintain. I'm sorry, Danny, Mike said, meaning it completely. That's a huge sacrifice for someone your age. It's part of the life, Danny replied with a maturity that seemed far beyond his 17 years. My father has given 22 years to protecting this country. If moving and starting over is what it takes to keep him safe so he can continue that service, then that's what we'll do. Captain Morrison placed a hand on Danny's shoulder again. His father is very proud of how he handled this situation. When Commander Martinez is fully recovered, he wants to personally thank Officer Rodriguez for treating his son's report with the respect it deserved. Mike felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. Sir, it was an honor to help, even in a small way. Danny is a remarkable young man. Yes, he is, Captain Morrison agreed. He's been raised to understand duty, honor, and sacrifice in ways that most people never will. His father has done an exceptional job preparing him for the realities of military life. As they prepared to leave, Danny approached Mike with the same formal bearing he had displayed during their first meeting. Officer Rodriguez, thank you for taking my report seriously and for treating me with respect. I hope I never have to use these procedures again, but I'm grateful that people like you are available when civilians need help from law enforcement. Mike shook Danny's hand, struck again by the teenager's remarkable composure and maturity. Danny, good luck with your new school and your new life. Your father is lucky to have a son like you. As he watched Danny and Captain Morrison walk toward the waiting military vehicle, Mike reflected on how much his perspective had changed over the past few days. He had learned that assumptions could be dangerous, that the most unlikely stories sometimes turned out to be the most important ones, and that heroism often came in unexpected packages. Danny Martinez had walked into his police station as what appeared to be just another worried teenager with an overactive imagination. He was leaving as a young man who had demonstrated courage, intelligence, and remarkable maturity in the face of a genuine crisis. His proper training and quick thinking had played a crucial role in saving his father's life. Mike returned to his desk with a new appreciation for the complexity of the world around him and a reminder that every person who walked through his station doors deserved to be taken seriously, regardless of their age or how unlikely their story might initially seem. Sometimes the most important cases were the ones that seemed the most ordinary at first glance. That evening, as Mike drove home to his own family, he thought about the sacrifices made by military families like the Martinezes. While most Americans slept safely in their beds, there were families living with constant risks and uncertainties because their loved ones had chosen to serve their country in the most dangerous assignments possible. Danny Martinez had given him a lesson in courage, maturity, and proper procedure that he would carry with him for the rest of his career. The 17-year-old had handled a life-threatening crisis with more grace and intelligence than many experienced adults, and he had done it while maintaining the operational security that had helped save his father's life. It was a reminder that heroism came in many forms, and sometimes the most important heroes were the ones who never made the headlines because their success depended on staying invisible.